So following on from previous videos, if you've not watched my How to Be an Architect or my previous video in this series about Part 1 workplace placement, leave links to those down below. You can go ahead and watch those. This video is going to be on the Part 2 study. So, once you've got to the end of your Part 1 placement, you're going to be looking for universities again, and also you might decide to go a different route with it. So what are your options and what should you be aware of? Well, a lot like the Part 1 study, you've got the apprenticeship option as well. However, this one works a bit differently. This one's the Level 7 Architect Apprenticeship, and that's because it essentially combines the Part 2 and the Part 3 together when you go down that route, but we'll get to that towards the end of the video. Likewise, like the Part 1 study, you've got courses that are validated for Part 2 as well, so it's worth checking on the RIBA website to see which university courses are validated to meet the criteria of Part 2 study. And again, I'll leave a link to those down below as well. Also, if you're in a workplace and you decide, don't really want to go for the apprenticeship option, but I would like to sort of study and work at the same time, the option of part-time study is still available to you as well. And I know a few people who did this during their Part 2, and it worked for them. And in fact, I tried doing my Part 2 part-time the first time. What do I mean by this? Well, when I was working, I got an offer that came through late, and I decided to take it, but I didn't want to quit my job at the same time. I just started my second practice. So I took this offer and I started doing it. But what I found was the course was sort of quite condensed. There was a lot going on, even though it's part-time. So I was trying to do my normal work, my day-to-day work in the office, and trying to do my study work at the same time. And I found it was quite overwhelming, and it became a bit much after a while. And by about halfway through the year, I spoke to the tutors and I decided that I was going to go full-time in September. I didn't return to the same university that I went to. I went back to Portsmouth, where I'd done my undergraduate, actually. But yeah, so part-time's an option, but it's often worth being aware that sometimes you can bite off more than you chew. So I'm aware that a lot of part-time study now is done over a longer period of time for Part 2. So that's definitely really good. And I know Portsmouth do that with their part-time, but other universities are available too. But yeah, moving on. So what can you expect with a Part 2? Well, like I say, picking one that's validated, you know that it meets the criteria that you need from a Part 2 course. So that's definitely one of the best places to start with. Knowing where you want to be in the world, you've probably got a better idea of that by now, because you've been in the industry for a bit longer now as well. You kind of know where you're living, you know where you want to be, and you know where it's going to be easier to manage things as well. Not just that as well, you've done it with your Part 1, but visiting the open days, actually chat to the university, you've got a better grip on those questions that you want to ask them now. You know how they put together, you know what you want to know about how they put together their course, so ask those questions, send emails. Don't be shy, and you know what? They love it when you ask them questions, because they know they're getting someone as well who's asking the right questions, knows what they want from their course, and you're going to do well by doing that as well. And you get a bit more choice with a Part 2 as well, at least from my experience. Your design studios, they're kind of more of a choice, whereas at undergraduate you're kind of assigned what you study, whereas here there's a bit more of a choice about how you go about that study. And I mean, with where I studied, you had different studios, each sort of teaching in a different way, in a different method, so your output would kind of develop from that, really. But one thing that was sort of crucial, key between them all, was there was a lot more emphasis on the professional element of things and applying what you'd learned in practice. What do I mean by this? Well, for example, one thing you should always be aware of is your building regulations. You would have picked up on these whilst you worked in practice. How are these considered in what you've done? And again, there's still this emphasis on you creating the extravagant designs, you really sort of pushing the envelope of, what you're capable of and showing your creativity and your thoughtfulness. But also the depth of the design is so key. And how you go about doing that, like I say, applying what you've learned in practice, things to be aware of, immediate context. So when you start putting together information, one thing we got asked to do was DNA statements for our designs. Which seems insane, but no, it's definitely important, and you're marked on that as well. So understanding the constraints that are around your site, you really have to put these forward in a more articulate way than you may have done at undergraduate. Because remember, at undergraduate, a lot of sort of the initial site analysis, that was kind of very pictorial and very graphic, and it was often pinned up with everything. But when it came to part two, these had to be documented in a more emphasised way, and they had to be more coherent. And I think even in the sort of ARB sort of criteria for sort of part two and everything, the real emphasis of a part two graduate is real coherent design and real emphasis and depth and breadth of design, among other things. But your knowledge is going to be sort of tested even more. You're going to be really pushed on the construction element of things. You really have to emphasise how does this building fit together. I mean, you're going to do sections of your building where you're going to have to illustrate how that's the technical section. So again, like I say, it ties back to all the stuff you've done in practice. It's not going to be things that you aren't familiar with, but you're going to have to add that element of more creative and more developed design work to it as well. You're illustrating what you're capable of at university, so combining those two elements together of your professional mindset and ability with your creative and thoughtful mindset, it's really going to be there. And as well as that, you're going to sort of do a lot of mock scenarios where, you're going to be in a setting up practice of your own, for example. How do you go about that? What should you put together? And, what's important to know about that? And, we sort of had this exercise where we're in a group. We had to sort of put together examples of what our practice would do. Put together mock numbers, put together mock projects. And, you have to consider in things like that, worst case scenarios, insurances, everything that helps make a practice run. And you have to sort of cost that and explain sort of your business model, all that kind of thing. And it's just a model, it's just a mock, it's just sort of an experiment. But again, you're marked on it, and you have to make sure that it would run if this was an actual business. So you're going to find that when you get to sort of part two, your emphasis on sort of the professional stuff is going to be there. Like I say, your design work, that's going to be more intense, and like I say, there's going to be so many more moving parts to it as such. Your portfolio is going to be heavier by the end of the year. That's all I'll say. But so really consider how you illustrate things when you have your final reviews, because it's just going to be so much information there. One thing that happened at the end of my part two as well is the RIBA invigilators came in and they were talking to us, and they're essentially going through our portfolios, making sure that we'd met the criteria of part two as well. So that may not happen to everyone, but be aware that that may happen to you. And so, we had to sort of talk through everything, and they were just sort of asking us things, and a lot of what they were asking was based on any gaps that were kind of in our portfolio or anything they weren't sure was there or anything could have been demonstrated in a stronger way. Your construction module is going to be back for your part two as well. And again, this is going to be done in a much more heavier way as well. Like I say, part of it might come from your design work, as in how it's illustrated in your designs, but also, your materiality. How's that work? And your understanding of materials and things like that, that's going to be there. But also, instead of a dissertation, you have a thesis as well. And your thesis will link to your design work. And how your thoughts and research went into that's going to sort of be really shown here. And how you go about your thesis. It's way more intense than a dissertation. You're going to be doing so much research on this and making sure that it really explains your thoughts behind what you've designed, like the whole theory behind it, essentially, if you will. That's going to be there. I mean, it's not going to directly reference your design work, so to speak, but for example, I did a mental wellbeing centre, so my thesis was written on healthcare and architecture, so a lot of things down there. So putting together a good thesis is going to be key. So you've got that, and that's your sort of big piece of writing in your part two. But once you've reached the end of your part two, you're going to feel so much more accomplished, and you're just going to feel a bit more ready to go back out to part two, because, like I say, when you come out of part one, you've kind of got this disjointed nature between what you've learned at university and what you've actually got in practice, whereas the part two definitely combines this a bit more. And when you start going out, you're going to find the interviews a lot more easier and a lot more capable of discussing with who you're sat opposite, because you're going to be able to address things a bit more, and with what you've got on your portfolio, they're going to sort of see that link and they'll want to ask you questions about it, and don't be afraid to answer them as openly as you want, because they'll appreciate that. So you've kind of got that when you go out to sort of interview after part 2. But like I mentioned at the start, you've got the level 7 architect apprenticeship, and I said I was going to explain this a bit more, so here we go. With this works a bit differently to the part 1. In fact, there's a lot more validated apprenticeships for the part level 7. So again, I'll leave links to this down below, and go check those out if that's something you're interested in. But I think this is because more people are able to do this, because once you're a part 1, you're working in a practice, and there's more practices available for you there's more people who are likely to take the apprenticeship option, because a lot more people are in practices, so there's more places willing to sort of support you through this method of study. So it's worth asking about that if that's something you're considering. And like I say, with this, it combines the part 2, part 3 together. And again, like the part 1, they kind of vary in length depending on which university you attend for it. But on the whole, they will be doing much of the same thing that happens at part 1. You'll be doing certain elements of the course at the university, but a lot of them are kind of done by proxy in the workplace. And again, you kind of have to do that, document that as we would have done in the level 6 degree apprenticeship. And at the end of this, you go through it, you progress through it, and when you come out of this, you will be qualified. You will have got part 3, so it combines those elements too. I'm not quite sure how it brings in those part 3 elements. I've not been in a position to sort of speak to anyone about that or find any sort of detailed research on that, but it does combine that. And like I say, that may be a valuable sort of route for someone to take, especially if they've decided they've really found their calling in practice and don't really want to leave practice to go to university. Because this is another thing that I didn't mention earlier, making the move from full-time work to full-time education can be so hard for a lot of people, and I knew a few people who struggled with that, because you've got no source of income anymore. Your days are kind of a bit unbalanced in a way, because you've gotten used to getting up early in the morning, going to work for 9 and leaving at 5:30, that kind of thing. But so that the apprenticeship or part-time study might be your way for dealing with that. Although interesting enough, a lot of people did start structuring their days like they structured their work days when they were doing their part 2 course, so that may be something to consider too. So hopefully this video has addressed a lot of questions or thoughts that many people are having on the part 2 study. If you've got any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them down below in the comment section. Don't forget to like the video, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. Until next time, I'll see you later.